the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
For the Tennessee Volunteers, with how the season ultimately unfolded, when you look at how the schedule came out for them based on how the opponents finished out this past year, was it about right based on expectations, based on personnel? Did they underachieve? Did they maybe overachieve a little bit based on what we saw from this Tennessee team all year long? What say you, Matt Green?
So there's a couple different ways to dissect this, because preseason number 12, I would say without a doubt they underachieved, right? Like that was underwhelming, an underwhelming performance. But you look at who the losses were to. Should they have beaten Alabama? They could have, but it's like, you don't want to talk about good losses, but it's like that was a game they could have won, and Alabama just kind of took off in the second half. That's not a bad loss at Alabama. Like Georgia, Georgia boat raced them at home, but you don't want to lose to Missouri as a Tennessee fan. You definitely don't want to get blown out by Missouri, but Missouri was better than Tennessee. Missouri was clearly, they were a top 10 team last year. So it's that's not a bad loss either. And then the one obviously is at Florida. Florida was that was basically their one good win of the entire season. And, it came to Tennessee. So when you just look at who the wins and losses were to, I don't feel like that. I probably picked them to go something like 8-4, 9-3, right? Preseason. So I don't necessarily feel like they underachieved. Maybe they underachieved national expectations, but maybe just national people were wrong. Maybe they were just never that good. So that's not necessarily Tennessee's fault that they didn't live up to whatever expectations were set. So, but I think when you look at the Florida game, I think that's the one that probably says underachieved more than about right.
I think that's right. I wonder how much of it was just the Florida game, I think, is the one bad loss, like you alluded to. The game was a mess all across the board. It got away from Tennessee. Florida, as we saw last year, not a bowl team. They were not good. And that was a tough one. But for whatever reason, winning in the Swamp is just really, really difficult, regardless of who the personnel is, who the coach is. Just Tennessee going into Gainesville, for whatever reason, it's just really, really hard for them to come away with a victory. They get them at home this year, which is huge. Got them at home 2 years ago, and they still, were up on Florida, played really well, and Florida still had the ball with an opportunity to play for the win with the last possession, and Kamal Hadden, I think, had the game ending pick from Anthony Richardson. But like you said, I think if you told a Tennessee fan this is how it would have gone without context, I think most Tennessee fans hoped for 9-3 last year, and 8-4, slightly below what I think fans would have wanted. But like you said, you lose to Georgia at home, it was a blowout. You didn't like that. You didn't like the blowout loss to Mizzou. That was frustrating. But by and large, Bama, you were up. The Bama thing hurts because you were up and you had full control of the game. And if you had just converted one or two of those red zone trips in the first half from field goals to touchdowns, I don't know if Alabama still ends up winning that game and has that momentum or has enough to end them to have that second half comeback, because I think they would have been dead in the water. Out of
reach.
Yeah, that's one that's always going to sting, because I think Alabama really just you played an excellent first half and you just didn't finish a couple trips in the red zone. If you had just one of those, I think it's a different situation there.
What was it, 20-7 at the half?
And it should have been
31-7.
Yeah,
28-7, something like that.
And that would have been very different. It would have been a different feel for Alabama coming out for the second half, being 3+ touchdowns down versus the 2 scores, which is what they ultimately were. I think
what's the opposite
too,
of sorry, go ahead.
Well, the other thing too about Tennessee that Heupel, I think, is not getting credit for. And so when people are looking at, and I think this is part of why the 2024 total is up to 9.5 for Tennessee this year, is Heupel has protected home field. And I think one of the things that matters about Heupel's game plan and his scheme is when you dig yourself a hole against this offense in Neyland, which is one of the loudest, most electric atmospheres in college football, games can get away from you here, because it's just so much pressure. The tempo is up, the crowd is up. Like, it's just, if you dig yourself a hole here of any kind, I think it's just really hard. You saw Spencer Rattler get really rattled on the road here. You saw Max Johnson, Texas A&M, have real problems with Tennessee and the crowd noise and just getting anything going in Neyland. Like, they've lost one home game in the last 2 years, Matt Green. One. Like, that's it. And it was to Georgia this year. Like, there is something to be said where, like, yeah, the season didn't go exactly what you wanted, but 9-4, all things considered, with the offense being a lot, like the downfield stuff being taken away, inconsistent play with wide receiver and quarterback. I think by and large was a big win. And the thing that's forgotten about Florida is I don't know how that game would have gone if Cooper had been healthy and Cooper's playing center. I think having to shift Ollie over, who was playing left guard and is a solid left guard, having to move him over for that one was tough, especially with the crowd noise and everything else with Florida. I wonder how that game would have gone if Cooper's healthy and you have your starting center in that one to communicate and help with that kind of environment. But I don't know. I think by and large, Tennessee, I think you make the case, overachieved with some of the offensive issues that they had this past year, with some of the limitations they had, to still get 8 wins and your only losses really outside of the Florida one being to 3 top 10 teams. And I just think that's good. I think you took care of business. They don't lose games they shouldn't lose.
I think that's fair, but I think if you told a Tennessee fan, like, before the season started, you're going to go 9-4, you're probably thinking like, tell me we beat Florida. Tell me we beat Florida. It's like, no, you lose to Florida at Florida again. Like, that would have been frustrating because you didn't have necessarily the key win out there. It's the biggest thing to me that I'll push back with you is it's like the underachieving on offense part, or like you're kind of saying they're overachieving because the offense wasn't good. Is it's like, since that's Heupel's whole identity is being the elite offense guy, that's where it feels more like underachieving, because like, what's the opposite of a blessing in disguise, right? I get a curse in disguise. Like, I think the A&M win may have been like a curse in disguise, that if you lose to A&M at home and then lose to Alabama the week after, they were probably sitting at like 4-3 or something like that. Like, I think if you're sitting at 4-3, the decision is made to go to Nico. And I think that's the biggest miss of this 2023 season to me.
No,
that's the
there
biggest
is zero
miss
chance they're going to Nico, a true freshman on the road at Alabama. That's not what's happening.
No, I'm saying if they lost to Alabama. So like, once they lose to A&M, then lose to Alabama, they have 3 losses already.
So then you're saying you're putting them in at Kentucky?
Absolutely. Like, get the freshman in there, because this season is lost. I think the fact that they just had 2 losses and they played so well versus Alabama, it's like, well, when Georgia comes to Tennessee, like, there was still some hope that, like, the way this team is constructed, they could potentially win the East, And I think if those chances for the East were spoiled earlier, I think then you're like, okay, we need to prepare ourselves for 2024, because that's the biggest criticism I have right now. Like, you've seen so many of the true freshman quarterbacks that are big time, that are take over as the full-time starter. A lot of those, as a sophomore, a lot of those guys took over as the starter as a freshman, like the Jacob Eason or something, getting like the last 7 or 8 games as a starter, like Matthew Stafford or something like that, Deshaun Watson. Like, there's certain big-time quarterbacks that, like, okay, once the season's lost, let's see what the future looks like. And that's where you had the Iowa game, but other than that, like, I would have liked to have seen Nico play for 6-7 weeks, and maybe Tennessee goes 8-5 last year. And I think him having more experience makes me feel better as a Tennessee fan going into 2024.
I don't know. They're right there in the driver's seat for a playoff right now. And Nico played the bowl game, played really well. We
haven't seen him. We don't know what he can do against the SEC.
I mean, Iowa's got an SEC type defense, my friend. Iowa's defense is nothing to. Iowa's defense is legit. It's a good
against
team.
Big Ten West teams. Yeah, they looked really good. Iowa, I'm not. Whatever, they're fine. He played well in the bowl game. Whatever. I don't even know how much to give bowl games anymore. It's this season. It's going to be a second career start to open up the 2024 season.
I would just
like him
if
to
he
have
was opening at NC State in the neutral site game. Like, that would have been a tough, like, welcome to the show type deal in Charlotte. But thankfully there is a buffer before they get to get to Charlotte. So
no,
it
it's
will be
good, but
UTC
I'm saying he could have a 5-6 game buffer right now, and you feel real good and actually know he's kind of taking some licks, and now he's ready for
I don't know.
that SEC season.
Bryce Young didn't need to
we'll
do
see.
it. He was fine. Bryce Young won the Heisman. Didn't take any licks the year prior. He just went right into it and was Heisman
Call
quarterback.
this guy Bryce Young. This isn't Alabama. Like, you can't just step in. The infrastructure isn't just there with everything around him either. This is nothing like Alabama. He's gonna have to be the offense.
Everything school HQ, and he doesn't have to be the offense. I don't have to do that. So that's all. Nico's gonna be fine. Matt Green, Big Ten. Speaking of the Big Ten, as we finish up our betting win total over unders here on the pod, Big Ten wrapping up here on Bet Online. So final one here. When you look at the futures here for the Big Ten regular season wins, who is the most shocking to you when you peruse, which outside of seeing Washington in the Big Ten and teams like USC in the Big Ten, pushing that aside for a second, what's the biggest shock for you, sir?
That's a good call, because definitely the most shocking part is just seeing USC Trojans. That's just that's not Big Ten stuff. I don't know about shocking. Ohio State at 10.5. I mean, I guess their schedule might be a little tougher than it was a year ago.
Oh, you think it should be higher, like 11.5?
I mean, they feel like they're going all in, right? So like with what they've done in the portal, like bringing guys back too, like it feels like they're
nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas podcast. Hell yeah.